Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome to another Eternal deck tech today with Expedition, the Expedition deck that we came up with for the latest ECQ, and we played as a team in the ECQ, putting Grgapm into the top 16 with it. And yeah, so I'm going to talk about the deck in detail. It's a TJP Control shell, but before we dive in, you know the drill. Subscribe down below, turn on the notification icon to not miss out on future content, and here a quick shout out to my teammate level 13 David, who created even more awesome graphics work for the channel and for the stream. So yeah, he made this cool new frame and social media slider at the bottom for me, so big shout out and big thanks to him. Once again, great work and aligns well with the logo stuff he did for me. Anyway, on to the deck. So as I said, TJP Control. Brief history of the deck. Basically, the deck started around when Sodi was introduced in the format, so quite some time ago. Jaffa actually was the one that wanted to mess with a TJP Control shell and kind of put up the first skeleton of the deck, and then push other people to try, and slowly got some people on the team interested in it and helped tune and work it. I was not very involved in the deck at that time, because unless the deck was clearly the best deck in the format, I'm not a big fan of playing these decks. They're kind of tedious, and I'm not as good at them as I am at more proactive strategies of varying kinds and mid-range strategies in general. So I was at that point just working on other stuff. And 2 or 3 weeks ago, the deck again started doing really well when people on the team played it, and it became more and more of a potential consideration for the ECQ. And while I was initially reluctant, I eventually came around and was like, alright, I'll give it a try and at least see how it plays and how it does. And it did really well at that time, so I was like, okay, I guess I might be coming around on this. This feels really strong and really well positioned, and you're just kind of stomping people. That was basically around the time where we had a lot of curse decks, which were really, really good matchups, and just the overall metagame was particularly great for this. And yeah, but I was still not that invested. I, over the course of the deck's development, made a couple suggestions here and there, or asked some questions to make sure that certain slots and configurations are optimal. Did some minor tweaks to the power base, just some stuff that I could think of bringing up or questioning from just theory crafting, looking at the list and stuff. But there wasn't too much to do. The deck was already pretty well tuned and tight. So yeah, aside from a bit of power-based tweaks, there wasn't a whole lot. But once I got more into the deck and played it a bunch, there was one, basically the only bigger change that I could contribute to the deck was Eager Offering over Ancient Lore, which we have been running for most of the time. The problem with Ancient Lore is that it's 1 power more expensive, doesn't affect the board, and most importantly costs double time, which frequently was an issue. So Offering seemed pretty good. Sure, it has some downsides, but overall I thought it has more upsides than downsides over Lore. And yeah, when we started testing it, that turned out to be the case, and it also helped a bit with the more challenging matchups when people were pressuring you, where Lore was particularly bad, and we didn't really struggle with slower decks. So after Zach tried the Offering idea, after being initially reluctant, he quickly fell in love with it and really liked what it did and how it won him multiple games that he would have lost if it would have been Ancient Lore. So that was the main contribution I could make to the deck. Basically, credit for most of the other parts of the deck go to the rest of the team. So yeah, it was one of the decks that I was considering. Another one was just Stone Scar Mastery type deck, and I kind of lost faith in the TJP deck. Few days before the tournament, it really didn't do well for me anymore, so I was leaning the other way. But then, like the day before, I kind of struggled equally much with the Stone Scar deck and gave TJP another try that felt a bit better, but I wasn't super happy with either. But the team was heavily leaning towards TJP and was confident in it. And basically, when you work with people that you trust and know they are skilled and don't really have a strong or clear opinion yourself, it's good to just kind of be able to fall back on them. So I was just like, okay, I don't really have a preference, so I'll just go with the majority vote in a way and hope that does well enough. And ultimately, it's still my choice, so I don't blame anyone. But yeah, in the end, I went 17 and 11. The deck felt okay, but not like insane, not as insane as it felt a couple of weeks before, due to the shift in metagame. Like Argenport is still a slightly favorable matchup, but only like slightly, while these curse decks were like laughably good matchups, for example. So things got a lot more middled out in terms of matchups and performances with the deck. But yeah, I went 17-11, 18-10 would have gotten me in. I'm pretty sure I played poor enough with the deck that there was probably at least one game that I lost that I could have won if I would have played better. Maybe two, so there's not making it is probably more on me than on the deck. Because I'm just not that confident and good with these types of decks than with others, so I'm more likely to make mistakes that cost me, and I'm pretty sure I did. So yeah, but overall the deck was not a bad choice. Maybe not the best choice, but also not a bad choice. And yeah, Gregor made it all the way to the top 16. I think he lost to the third Argenport guy. I think he went like 2-1 against Argenport and then lost and fell out. And I think he lost because he made a mistake that came back to bite him in the match, losing him the match, because the matchup, from what he told me, and his experience is pretty unforgiving for the TJP side, while the Argenport side can make mistakes that don't really matter too much a lot of the time. So yeah, but if you don't make mistakes, you're favored and more often than not end up winning against Argenport, at least in the experience of our team from what we played and tested. But yeah, I struggled a fair share against Argenport in my run games, lost a bunch to them, and I probably did not lose all of them just because I couldn't have won them, but probably also because I contributed to losing them. Like for example, there was one case where I Bastion of Dawn, a Marionette cross, because I didn't think about it and didn't think that it's transforming it rather than killing it, so it doesn't kill the Marionette, and that game might have been winnable if I wouldn't have done that, for example. Like, that's the most obvious thing that I can remember. Anyway, I'll give you the rundown of the list. If you're looking for a control deck in the format like a true control deck, I think this is probably the best you can do. I've seen people doing greedy stuff with like splashing Zulta Arcanum and stuff. I don't want that. I don't think that's good. I don't think that's necessary. It's just, yeah, greedy, and makes the deck more inconsistent. The deck already has a bit wonky influence, since we don't have crests, and the influence requirements are as steep or steeper than in a lot of throne decks of this type. Anyway, let's talk about the card choices. So first off, we have our card draw package. That's 4 offering, 4 wisdom. Gregor had 3 offering, 1 acolyte. It's kind of close between that. I felt like I don't need the acolyte enough, especially if the acolyte is replaced with an offering, which also is pretty good at helping you get those like 4th and 5th power drops, while overall being a more powerful and impactful card across the board. And then you can sort of consider... Sorry about that. That hair was getting in my face and really annoying me. Anyway, Seek Answers is in a way like a cantrip, because if you don't need it for power, you just draw a random non-power card, so it's basically like a 2-cost cantrip that finds you whichever half of the deck you need, which is pretty solid. Honestly, it makes the deck run smoother, it makes the power more consistent. It's a surprisingly great card in Expedition. I'll talk a bit more about that later as part of the power. Then we have 6 Smugglers. Basically, Rime Conclave Smuggler is really great. Pearl Abbey Smuggler is so-so, but can be decent in the late game because it can actually grow pretty big and has some nice synergy with Bastion and stuff. And we wanted a Justice Market for Edict of Kodosh. So that was the natural choice. Also, it's still better than the usually than the what's it called, the Elysian Smuggler. We didn't really want more smugglers, because if you would run more smugglers, we would have to play more dragons to support them, which we also didn't really want because they could be clunky, and we also needed the room for other cards. So this is how we ended up with 6, and the number plays pretty well. The deck also only has limited, like, generic targets to get with the smugglers, so that's another reason why you don't want too many. Then we have our removal suit, 3 Wasps, 4 Outcast if you want to count them, 4 Permafrost, 4 Defiance, 4 Shen-Ra Speaks, and 4 Ageworn Vestige in a way. So Wasp is just for Aegis units mostly, and it's a pretty decent removal for most offensive threats, but there's a bunch of Quick Draw and Overwhelm where it's not that great, but it's the best answer against stuff like an Aegis Varet with a weapon and stuff like that. So it's just good to have some. We were going back and forth between having a 4th or not, but the card can also be awkward for the mentioned reasons. Then there's like some fast removal, there's stuff like Strike that gives Quick Draw out of Stone Scar decks and so on. So it has its issues and it's a bit clunky. But it also matters that it's a unit, so sometimes you can just ambush end of turn, attack, and then play a Sodi and shoot down a flyer that attacked you. Like, for example, if they attack you with an Eclipse Dragon, you just Wasp end of turn, and on your turn attack and Sodi the dragon, stuff like that, or carve it. A bunch of options. Forbidden Rider Outcast, one of the main reasons together with Sodi to be in Primal, because yeah, the card is just brutal. Like, it's a 3/3 flyer, which is already very solid on offense and defense. And of course, the summon curse is so good. Like, either it basically virtually, for all intents and purposes of the deck, kills a medium-sized unit, or even a bit bigger unit, because if they have like 1 or 2 attack, the Outcast just blanks it still. So it's really good at virtually dealing with units, and if there is none against either an empty board or unit-like decks, you suddenly have this really powerful curse of loneliness, which actually like starts threatening the opponent and also makes Vestige better. So yeah, this card is just an all-star and super powerful. Then we have 4 Permafrost and 4 Defiance as cheap interaction, which is pretty important because the deck starts kind of slow, has a bunch of depleted power, and this is a great way to recoup tempo. And another reason why like Offering is so much better than Lore, because suddenly on 4 you can go like Offering and Permafrost or Defiance instead of just drawing cards and not affecting the board. So suddenly you can block like a random small guy and shut off a bigger guy in the same turn. And yeah, Shen-Ra Speaks, just harsh roll basically, not much to explain here. This effect is a lot better in Expedition than in Throne, because there's fewer units that just both need to be answered right away, and at the same time kind of 2-for-1 you, and are like a good standalone threat. So there are much fuller, much more cluttered boards. There are also fewer good ways to stop Shen-Ra Speaks, so it's much better to rely on it, while in Throne I think these days it's more often than not kind of a bad strategy to rely on a sweeper main deck and use it more as a situational tool. While in Expedition that's a very good strategy, and we even run 8. I can't stress enough how good this card is. This card is just amazing. Like, even on 6 It's just very good. It virtually gains us 9 health. It pressures the opponent. It invalidates all small units the opponent has really quickly, especially if the board is empty. Like if you go Shen-Ra Speaks into a Vestige, that's so disgusting unless the opponent has something with 4 more health. And once you get to the stage where you can play these with Spellcraft, it's just dump. You drop this, wipe everything, hit the opponent for 3, then they maybe don't have a refill, you hit them again, or their refill dies to Vestige. Like, the 9 health alone is so good in a control deck, buying you so much time. Like, the threat / removal attached with a sweeper and attached with 9 extra health, effectively, is just amazing. So this card is one of the all-stars in the deck, in my opinion. And yeah, then we have value / removal type stuff like Sodi that can deal with annoying sights, an additional way to deal with units like flyers. Of course, can draw cards and block pretty well. So some decks like Illusion, for example, have a really hard time against a 3/6 that just kind of gums up the ground. On empty boards you can suddenly start attacking and drawing cards. It protects Vestige well, while Vestige attacking, the enemy player draws a card for Sodi, and so on and so forth. So there are just like a lot of nice synergies, and the card's pretty powerful. It can be a bit situational setup-wise, and since you kind of need to fit everything, that's why we ended up dropping down to 3 from the initial 4. And yeah, then we have the power base, 25 power, 4 seek power, 4 seek answers, so 33 power effectively, together with wisdom and offering to help us keep hitting those power drops, because the deck eventually needs to get to 9, because that's where you really take over, basically. The good thing about Seek Answers is, first of all, it can potentially fix colors, because it can at least randomly draw a color you don't have yet, while a favor can't. It also can draw duels, so it can fix multiple influences, which is pretty good. And also, using a favor other than Vara's favor usually isn't really worth a full card. So sure, you get a minor effect when you get the power, but you get a less good power searcher than Seek Answers because of the fixing thing. And later, when you don't really want power anymore, but you want value from your favor doesn't do that much, while Seek Answers actually turns into a full card, unless you get unlucky and draw a Seek power, which can happen. But yeah, card's actually pretty great. In Throne, it's too slow and there are too many better options, but we don't have cargoes here, so if we had cargoes, we would probably play like 2 cargoes, 2 Seek Answers or something. We might do that now that we probably get the new cargoes in the next set. But yeah, Seek Answers, surprisingly great. Give it a try. And then yeah, power base, just 12 seats, 4 insignias for additional fixing, and 9 sigils. And then a brief overview of the market. We have Bring Down. This until the last minute, and even I think Gregor still had the old version, was Cleansing Rain for the curse decks, but they almost disappeared, and I didn't really see any, and like the matchup was pretty good, so for the few that you face, you're still like a favorite against them, even without Rain, even though it's going to be a lot harder instead of just a buy. And yeah, Illusion could be a bit tricky sometimes, and we didn't have a great market option for that, and Bring Down is pretty good there between Shihan and Griffin type stuff. So that's how Cleansing Rain became Bring Down. Also, once you have used your Edict, having a backup Bring Down against stuff like Carvet and Doom is pretty nice against Ardenport, for example. So the card just does a bunch of good things. And Spell Shaper, just like a catch-all answer, and like kind of allowing the deck to go this sort of mid-range offensive plan. Like sometimes you have these draws where you go like Smuggler into Spell Shaper, or into like Outcast, and then follow it up with a Sodi and a Thunderstrike Dragon, and suddenly you are this like good stuff mid-range proactive deck, and your opponent doesn't know what happened, and is behind because their deck isn't like super fast. Then Edict of Kodosh, just super good and super important. Some of the best units in the format are Shadow. Edict of Kodosh answers all of them. One of the more important ones is Tazbu. This allows you to answer Tazbu without Tazbu 2-for-1ing, which is pretty important. Then we have Eli and Mizo, which for quite some time was the new Patriarch, the Griffin, the Curse Griffin, because the deck still has 8 curses, so the Griffin sometimes draws you like 1 or 2 cards, and it's a flyer, which is nice. But in the end, we decided to go back to Eli and Mizo, just because it's a bit bigger and more impactful, independent of curses, and just hits a bit harder, and can just really take over games and turn on the opponent, while the Griffin is just like a more higher variance value play. And then we have Bastion of Dawn. I think that's an idea that Gregor came up with at some point. First of all, it provides a really nice relic removal. Just once again, make sure to not use it on Marionette Cross, because it doesn't actually destroy the relic, it transforms it, so it doesn't trigger the end of a relic. And then you have this nice like value thing where you can make additional dragons, or you just return the Smuggler you used to get this, and then the turn after clone the Smuggler, and then you get the rest of your market and just take over the game. That's a common like value line in the late game on an empty board, for example at 8 power, where you just Smuggler, get Bastion, play Bastion, return Smuggler, then copy Smuggler, play multiple Smugglers, clear out your market, get Eli and Mizo and Spellshaper, and just win the game. So yeah, card's pretty great. Genetrix is like kind of whatever, and you want something in play, but you often have like a Rime Conclave Smuggler with Aegis in play at that point, which is a great target for Genetrix, making her still like a pretty decent unit to get. And it's just kind of like a high value sort of draw multiple cards type of market card that can win grindier games, which is pretty great. Alright, that's the deck. If you love control decks, this is what I would recommend for you in Expedition. We tried and considered stuff like Kerendon, and it just, what Shadow gives you just doesn't outweigh what Primal gives you, and that's why we stuck with Primal. The other colors just don't offer as much. Alright, that's the deck, and as usual we're gonna hop into some games, show it to you in action, and yeah, see how we're doing. So see you in a moment with the first game. Stay tuned.